Our subject this morning is one that seems to me to be extremely vital at this time. Just before coming on the platform, I made a final look at Webster's dictionary to see what they have to say about love. It was rather disappointing. It is one of these words that has probably more different definitions than we can imagine. And also, nearly all of the definitions remind us that a dictionary is not a book of meanings, but a book of usages. The popular idiom dominates the dictionary. The use we make of terms and words in our daily living become the basis of dictionary definition. So we have to search elsewhere for a deeper and more comprehensive understanding of the subject of the moment. Also, I might make note that television, motion pictures, and paperback novels are not very helpful in this particular situation. They represent, at best, a very inadequate understanding of the basic meaning of human affection. I think we can probably do better to start out with by remembering the use of the word in biblical literature and also in the Neoplatonic literature. Neoplatonism, which arose in North Africa about the beginning of the Christian era, profoundly affected the philosophy of Christianity. The early fathers realized from the beginning that there was one essential weakness in the New Testament, and that weakness was an inadequate approach to the mystical aspects of faith. The simple language, the ethics, the morality, the integrities are clearly stated. But the eternal search for participation in religion, while implied, is not amplified to the point of utility. At the very beginning, of course, many of the Christian fathers were born pagans, and they brought into Christianity their scholarship and their previous interpretations of religious principles. And among these, there were a number of prominent thinkers whose beliefs on a mystical level seem to complement very closely the essential principle of Christian doctrine. This particular phase of Christianity, mystical Christianity, has paralleled orthodoxy from the beginning, and most of it arose in the Alexandrian area, where Christianity was in the presence of a very strong mystical philosophy. Among those who made great use of this in the church were Clement of Alexandria and St. Augustine, later St. Thomas Aquinas. The mystical Christianity that developed in the first century has continued to the present time, and nowhere do we find any real opposition to what might be termed an esoteric Christianity. And when we come to this point, it is inevitable that we should give consideration to the human relationship with the world around him, the world within him, and the mysterious invisible universe of causes which is constantly moving in upon his material existence. This brings very strongly into focus the relationship between man and deity. And this relationship has been called in the Bible the love of God. Love for divine being, the bestowal of the deepest and richest of all human emotional aspirations upon the divine principle at the source of life. In addition to this, the Neoplatonists emphasized another point, which came to be gradually accepted throughout Christendom also, and that is the identity of the words love and law. In our thinking today, in popular approach to the subject, law and love come into opposition. They appear to be in conflict. But the Bible says, whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth. In other words, love involves discipline. And the discipline side of love is law. And the mystical side of discipline is love. Thus, the two terms are more identical than most folks really believe or understand. In the same context also, it becomes rather obvious that law and love represent two aspects of one indivisible energy. The life principle which animates all things is not a materialistic, sterile impulse. It is not something that is chemical. It is alchemical. It is something that transcends the literal. And the relationship of law and love as both being contained within one power, the power that flows forever from the fountains of existence. There is no law apart from love in the universe. But in our common thinking, we divide the universal existence into a state of legal existence and a state of mystical existence. But actually, they are the same thing. Plotinus, who has contributed so much to early Christian mysticism, gives us some rather valuable indications of the meaning of the word love, how it is to be understood. He assumed that love exists on a number of levels. All these levels, however, are merely conditions of one principle. There is no division between sacred and profane things. What we call secular is merely one aspect of religion. In Plotinus, therefore, we find the essential statement that the highest emotion of which the human being is capable is the mystical experience of divine love with God. That every emotion, every feeling that we have, moved by faith, moves towards an adoration of the infinite. Primitive people had no problem about this. To the primitive person, the universe was all divine. We have gradually secularized a large part of existence, and therefore to meet this emergency we have divided law into religious and secular. This does not mean, however, that either is a separate structure, for love is as essential to secular law as it is to religious law. It is secular law as love that advances civilization, that labors continuously for the improvement of living things. It is secular law on the religious level that places all things within patterns of integrity, requiring that justice be merciful, and that mercy shall be governed by reason, by common sense, and by lawful understanding of the divine purpose. Today, most people have very little understanding of any divine purpose or any particular desire to quest for it. Only a few have recognized the importance of trying to understand the operation of the spiritual mystery in the objective world of phenomena. Thus we find the next after the highest form of love, which is the love of the infinite. Plotinus gives us a second great subject for emotional attachment, love of truth. Love of truth is not necessarily a direct participation in truth, but love of truth means that the individual emotionally reacts constructively and favorably to all things which are essentially true and right. Love of truth, then, is the recognition that truth is the goal, the end, toward which all knowledge moves. and that truth is in itself merely an aspect of the compound of law and love upon a higher level of human understanding. Plotinus then also tells us that another great form of love is love of wisdom. Love of wisdom is the attitude by which the individual confers his emotional vitality upon things which are essential. Love of wisdom means that the person believes in the importance of enlightened knowledge, places the attainment of knowledge, understanding, insight above all material concerns, so that in a sense man internally leaves all else and clings to that which is true or soul. Love of wisdom, then, is the elevation in life of the search for wisdom to a primary place in the existence of the individual. He should place it above honor. He should place it above wealth. He should place it above all other things that man can bestow. For the most priceless gift of all is the gift of internal wiseness, and wisdom is one of the few things the individual can take with him out of the material world. Nearly everything that he can accumulate he must leave behind. But love of truth lures him on to a greater existence. Love of wisdom strengthens him to meet the inevitable changes of life and transition. Then Plotinus gives us some more personal things. He moves down now into what might be termed the area of personal allegiances. So he tells us that among the forms of love that are commendable are love of country, love of our backgrounds, our traditions, our values, respect for the integrities of the past, respect for the integrities of the present, courage to build for the integrities of the future. Love of country is therefore a personal emotion, but is proper if love of country is vitalized by a constructive service to the needs of a nation or cooperation with the highest convictions and principles of a country. Love of country means to dedicate oneself to making sure that his own participation in a national existence is as constructive as possible. Then he gives us the lesser denominations, love of the community in which we live, love of all the environmental things with which we are associated. Then he goes on and gives us the aesthetic aspects of love, love of beauty, the recognition of that which is essentially beautiful, because things that are essentially beautiful are patterned by law and then sold by love. All that is truly beautiful is good. Therefore we have the Socratic triad, the one, the beautiful, and the good. All beauty must be essential. There must be nothing in it which depraves it. There must be nothing in it which is unsuitable to the contemplation of thoughtful persons. Beauty, therefore, is essential integrity manifesting in various departments of art. Beauty is the ability to interpret, to discover, to transmit the order, symmetry, integrity, and harmony of life. And, of course, with beauty comes naturally harmony, which again becomes part of our aesthetic discipline. For harmony is that power within the individual by means of which he perceives the proper order of all things outside of himself. Harmony, therefore, is not to fall into dissonance. And we realize that today, in the arts especially, the integrities, love of art, has gradually been perverted by love of wealth. The individual today is no longer dedicated to the perpetuation of beauty. He is more definitely dedicated to the selfish advancement of his own career and to profit. The moment the compromise exists in which the individual, for personal advantage, perverts or corrupts any form of universal harmony, when this occurs, the individual, the community, and the world must suffer. Because these laws of integrity cannot be broken by man. But if man disobeys them, man is broken by the laws. This is really chastisement. It is simply love telling us that it must bestow upon us the disciplines necessary to regenerate our own natures. On the very same levels as these, we have all the different arts with which we are concerned. We have architecture. We have all types of creativity. For creativity is an expression of our inner insight as to the divine purpose and our place in it. Every human being, by nature, wishes to make a contribution of some kind, by means of which his name and memory may be bestowed upon posterity. If this is his primary purpose, he is, however, self-centered. And this brings us to one of the fallacies of perverted affection, and that is love of self. The only time in which love of self can be tolerated is when it is capitalized and therefore becomes a synonym of God. The personal self, the individual falling in love with his own ego, produces an arrogance which is not consistent with any aesthetic or cultural advancement. Therefore, all the individual does when he falls in love with himself is to fall in love with an image in a mirror. When he does this, he cripples his own purposes and inevitably becomes self-centered. He becomes selfish. He becomes in one way or another willing to compromise principles to the advancement of personal purposes. Where compromise exists, love is corrupted, for it cannot and must not be functioning in that way. Plotinus then goes on to give us other interesting aspects of the subject, and he finally comes to love in terms of human relationships. He tells us, for instance, that we live in a very beautiful world. Therefore, love of nature is a commendable emotion. To become en rapport with the living things around us in creation, flowers and birds and all kinds of the beauties of life, everything from the most marvelous flower to the most glorious sunset. A sincere emotional appreciation of these things is a form of love. It is love, again, of beauty, not as an artist, but as a beholder. It is a love of life, not because we can create it, but because we can destroy the forms of it if we are selfish or hateful. So to involve the love of nature is very important, because it impels us to be quiet and become aware that nature is a most perfect textbook of the entire universal purpose. All the laws of nature, love and law, are combined in the development and perpetuation of all the creations and species around us in life. Then we come to these other very much more personal, and one of the most important of these is love of family. Now, love of family to Plotinus was a symbolical emotion. It is an emotion based upon the fact that to the individual, family is a microcosm of the universe. Family is the little universe in which, as persons, we exist for various parts of our lives. In these family relations, we recognize the outworking of a divine principle. We realize that the 47th proposition of Euclid, actually by Pythagoras, is an example of the equilibrium of family, the primary trinity of family: father, mother, child. This triad goes on through every level of nature, all the way back to the divine creative triad. All these relationships which come to us in family are either to be carried with indifference, carried with possible irritation, or carried with insight and understanding. And the simple entrance into the proper understanding of family life is affection. Affection, if it is basic, will overcome all other obstacles. But if it is not basic, it can be overcome by very minor circumstances and influences. In the family, the Neoplatonist gives us certain relationships. The relationship of husband and wife, the relationship of parents and children, the relationship of children to parents, the relationship of children among themselves, and finally of more remote relations out into the family background. All of these relationships are revelations of the divine purpose. They are all of them opportunities to grow in wisdom, beauty, and truth. And they are also hazards to the individual who is loveless. The individual who regards affection as something in which he claims a consideration for himself has missed the point entirely. This is very beautifully set forth in the Song which is Solomon, or the Canticles in the Bible. In this problem, Solomon has three mysterious relationships with the dark maiden with whom within this pattern. It is nothing more or less than another version of Dante's Beatrice and of the World Virgin and the Blessed Damozel of Rossetti. It is a symbolical story, originally a stage play in the Old Testament. In the beginning, Solomon says, "My beloved is mine." About halfway through the poem, where he is a series of poems, he says, "My beloved is mine, and I am my beloved's." And at the end of the Canticles, he says, "I am my beloved's." The motion is very obvious psychologically, from possession to being possessed. And love is a process of moving from the concept of possession to the concept of being possessed by an emotion that is greater than man, more important, more vital, because true love is not in being loved, but in loving itself, as St. Francis de Assisi has so clearly pointed out. So the moment love becomes possessive, there's something wrong with it. And this is contrary to our common thinking, because I've heard a great many people come in to talk to me about their personal emotions, and they expect the marriage partner to be jealous. If the marriage partner isn't jealous, they do not believe there's any affection at all. Several have told me that if they did not have periodic fist fights, there was no basic affection. Well, the truth of the matter is that nearly always in human emotions, self-interest becomes a dominating factor. The individual wishes to conquer. And in this world, ambition is fulfilled in conquest. But in this world also, love is fulfilled in release from all personal objectives. There is only one possible answer to love, and that is that it gives. Its essential power is redemptive, not possessive. It enriches by giving, and impoverishes itself and all others by commanding. No affection can be completely controlled by the mind. And we come to a very interesting problem here. We realize from the study of anthropology and of all of the various departments of nature that the emotional complex is much older than the mental. Man had feelings before he even attempted to understand them. The human being had emotional pressures, and these emotional pressures gradually came under the control of the mind. But the emotional pressures had never been completely conquered by the mind. the mind has been used principally as means or as skills to the accomplishment of personal emotional ends. The individual used his emotions to get what he wanted. He has used his mind also as a means of skilling the desire to get what he wanted. So the mind developed all kinds of excuses for selfishness, all kinds of explanations for jealousy, hate, anger, suspicion, doubt, worry, fear, anxiety. All of these emotional pressures in themselves have been ordered or rationalized or irrationalized by the mind. The mind is always present to fulfill or justify the pressures of the emotions. If we want something badly enough, we can bring the mind in and find ingenious ways of getting what we want. If by chance the process results in a conspiracy in which we know we must participate in an action that is dishonorable, the mind will justify the dishonor. The mind will explain, perhaps, that everybody lives off of everybody else, so why not start now? The mind also says, what I want, I must have. The emotion tells him what he wants, and the mind tells him how to get it. This partnership is extremely powerful and is still very largely dominating human conduct. And it will do so as long as basically man's internal life is selfish. As long as he continuously labors to the advancement of his own purposes, arguing himself in and out of the merits and demerits of his own conduct, as long as this process continues, the problems of society cannot be solved. This is very obvious today, for the great world family in which we are a part is in a state of terrible agitation, and behind all of this agitation is self-interest of some kind. The self-interest of the despot to control the people. The self-interest of the people to try to overthrow the despot. And all the way along, the lack of love changes possible arbitrations into open warfare. The profit system is another example of self-centeredness, in which in order to get what we want and as much of it as possible, we are perfectly willing to injure others, cheat them, delude them with false promises, and in any way that can be worked out, use others for our own advancement. This is a complete absence of love. Now, Paul tells us that love suffereth long and is kind. And I don't know of any phrase in the New Testament when I use it and a domestic problem doesn't make more misery. People don't want to hear it. They do not wish to suffer long over anything. And most people are not interested in suffering long over love. They are more inclined to take the position that it isn't the lesson which is important, it's the feelings of the moment. The individual would rather break a marriage than outgrow his own selfishness. And this happens in countless cases. The problems of relationships are challenges which are either met by the person who wants to help and to grow, or else they are rejected by the individual who places his own comfort above every other consideration. So we have a great deal to learn in this particular area. Now we also go on to various other aspects of love. The most intimate form being human relationships. Here we have the love principle in the universe bound tightly to the principle of reproduction and the perpetuation of the species. Here then we have a very grave problem for consideration. That is the inevitable fact that the entire reproductive process is a microcosm of a universal principle. It is a way in which nature accomplishes something. But nature is moved in all of this process of accomplishment by law, love, and consistency. Therefore, human relationships of an intimate nature must always be regarded as symbolical of something, symbolical of a deeper, more important, more powerful fact than the physical relationships themselves. Any human relationship that is based upon physical factors alone will fail. You cannot win on that level. But any emotion, enriched, ennobled, regenerated by inward consciousness, is transformed alchemically into a ritual, into a mass, into a magnificent spiritual experience. On that level, human affections become probably the most powerful force for regeneration that there is. But viewed on a purely physical, selfish gratification of emotional intensity, they are a disastrous situation. Furthermore, we have to bear in mind that in spite of all our feelings to the contrary, our intimate emotional reactions are not controlled by our emotions primarily, but by the mind. It is the mind that has taken over and is responsible for practically all of the physical pressures of human relationships. Therefore, as Plotinus points out, the idealizing of life is to establish all material things on levels of sacraments. Patriotism is a sacrament, not an allegiance. Family is a sacrament, not guaranteed by the state or sanctified by the church necessarily. It is a sacrament of relationships. Business is a mass instead of being a mass of selfishness. All of these things, properly done, properly used, idealized, become the basis of progress. They make possible the growth of individuals and of societies. But while they remain simply conveniences of credit and profit, all will go badly. There is no other possible way in which we can face these difficulties. Faced with them, we then come to the next question. What do we do about it? The average person is in a bewildered state. He does not really know how to regenerate or redeem his own nature. The pressures of the problems around him are so intense that he does not feel adequate. He has never yet learned to realize that truth and one person equals a majority. He is unable to withstand a very materialistic, conniving peer group to which he belongs. He is unable to resist the corruption of that which is around him and which has refused or rejected or has never known the universal principles of life. So we come now to a definition, a simple approach to the problem of love. Love is something that springs up in human beings. And in most instances, it begins with a very sincere emotion. The average person is not necessarily without a certain degree of true affection in his nature. This true affection, however, is gradually diluted by pressures of circumstance. One answer to this, of course, is the fact that the religious life of society has gradually deteriorated. Not too long ago, every individual, regardless of his personal attitudes and ambitions, was largely guided by the church of his choice. He was told primarily what constituted a moral life. He was given the laws and rules of common decency. He was given the impulse and the strength to a degree to keep the principles he believed. He recharged this in himself by periodic religious experiences. He lived with and shared the problems of people of religious convictions similar to his own. 100 years ago, American society was very largely built upon congregational worship. The individual lived in a community. He selected his church. Perhaps there was only one, perhaps there were several. But in each instance, he was surrounded by people who also held attitudes similar to his own. Now, no one will deny that in this situation there were also shortcomings. The very tight theological point of view became too oppressive for many people. But at the same time, there was a certain strength, a certain common uniting in worship, and the community rose in righteous indignation against any serious compromise of these religious principles. Now, the fact that we live in a different generation does not alter the integrity of the principles, but it must and does alter our approach to them. We are living in a much more liberal time, but liberality is not the privilege of doing what we please. It is a privilege given to us to do what is right. And the liberality of it is that we can all do what is right if we want to, seriously enough. The problem of religion today, then, is its lack of personal centering in the life of the average person. He does not have a regular contact with people of similar spiritual conviction. He does not recharge his spiritual life by more or less continuing contact with spiritual values. So what comes out of this is very simple. It is evidently part of nature that the human being shall not be constantly led. He must finally lead himself. He cannot be continually a child. He must attain maturity. And as he becomes more and more mature, the supports and defenses which held him in a pattern are relaxed. But this is not a proof that he no longer needs the pattern. It means he must take it over and administer it himself. When we start to think about the problem of love, then, we realize that wherever love intensifies a conviction, things are accomplished more easily. The individual who loves nature becomes happy in it. The individual who loves music has a life purpose with that which he has given his affection. The painter who loves beauty has now a standard of life. And if he is left to himself and left to his own inner guidance, he will probably do fairly well. But unfortunately, each of these arts has been so commercialized that the average member of these various professions and crafts feels it inevitable that he must compromise in order to survive. Yet actually, we do not have to make this kind of compromise. It all depends upon the ability of the person to release to himself at least the beginnings of a sincere, unselfish affection. There must be something to which he can bestow his affection without fear. There must also be a strength in himself that if his bestowal has been misjudged or his trust was abused, that he still is not damaged in the essential principle itself. If he happens to love the wrong thing, this is too bad. But that does not mean that love is wrong. It means that it has been unwisely bestowed. The fault still remains with the individual himself. But whatever lesson he learns, no matter how grievous it may be, it should bring him into fuller and closer association with the great laws of nature under which he exists. Religion, therefore, giving us the concept of the love of God, has found various ways to attempt to strengthen this in our own relationships. The most common strengthening force, of course, is religion, and religion's greatest power is faith. Now, faith is belief and veneration for the reality of things unseen. Faith begins with the individual recognizing that there are powers greater than his own. Faith begins with a dependency upon life itself. Even though we may be very materialistic people in many instances, we all have some degree of faith. We have faith that when we plant the seeds, the harvest will come. We have faith that the seasons will move in proper sequence. We have faith in the natural energies by which life is sustained. We accept continuously things that we do not understand. We make use of powers which we can never define. We try to depend and value relationships which are, for the most part, intangible. Therefore, faith, in a sense, is the victory of the intangible over the tangible. It is the realization, probably most of all and first of all, that the infinite purpose is good. Faith is the complete conviction that a divine power or principle is at the source of life, and that this principle, or this power, or this being, if you so wish to denominate it, has as its primary objective the survival and salvation of all that lives. This is demonstrated to us every day. The mystery of life around us, the mystery of human birth, the mystery of every natural phenomenon. All these mysteries must, or should certainly, impel us to the realization that there is some conscious or intelligent principle behind them. We look out at the universe, something unimaginably vast, and yet this vast universe is maintained in an astonishing order that transcends our understanding. In the case of this nature, where we behold the infinite workings of infinite being, but cannot explain them fully, we must have faith. Faith is, however, justified in two ways. It is justified by science as science becomes more and more aware of the mystery, and it is justified in personal life by the constructive consequences of a correct spiritual attitude. There is therefore proof constantly building up that faith is real. Faith beginning to take hold of the individual relieves him from most of the conflicts which cause irritation and which perhaps result in doubts and may even lead to agnosticism or atheism. Faith is within the person in the reality of good, can be sustained and strengthened by constant or regular mystical communion with this principle. We can strengthen it through prayer.
We can strengthen it through visualization of its purpose. We can strengthen it by going home and
sitting under a tree and seeing how light works. We can find strength for it in great art and music and literature. We can also find it in the intimate psychic relationships that we have with parents and children, and in the marital relationships. All of these things are part of something that either leads to superficial disillusionment or by quiet and reasonable contemplation contributes to spiritual strength and the victory of the internal over the external in human affairs. This victory is real and possible. Once we have begun to recognize that we have within ourselves a participation in that great plan which is love released through science, of something that is forever protecting and guiding. Many persons in the experiences of living bound to their own conviction that a prayerfulness, that a strong dedication will lift the mind and the emotions from the intranquilities of daily living. We also realize that faith is therapeutic. Faith is probably the basis of releasing the love of God into the body of man, to make possible the reconstruction of the body, to help its restoration wherever this is possible. And of course, the faith factor is merely existing because of man's internal love and respect for the divine plan of which he is a part. Therefore, it is very important to realize that various emotions have inevitable consequences. And wherever an emotional attitude is wrong, the consequences will be harmful. Harmful to the individual, to his family, to his community, to his world, and to the universe itself. Each person who allows his own pressures to escape from a simple veneration for life will have trouble. We know that today a great deal is being done on a psychological level to experiment with these mysteries. And we have also very definite evidence that the emotional pressures of the individual can destroy him. They can also destroy him slowly and painfully. They can bring upon him one misery and misfortune after another. The individual who has not directed and purified his own emotional life is like the man of whom it was said that cowards die many times, brave men but once. We are constantly building up problems, and then we are wondering how they develop. We may even shake our fist at heaven and blame it for our troubles. But actually, uncontrolled attitudes are to blame. All attitudes that are selfish or destructive are wrong. There is really no such thing as righteous indignation, all concepts to the contrary notwithstanding. Righteous indignation is not the answer to any problem. Insight is the answer. Indignation, anger, the tendency to revenge, the feeling that we must hurt someone that hurts us, these are all contrary to the divine plan. Now, we would be a little hesitant going out in an automobile that is out of order, or going out and facing physical things that are wrong. We would be very careful if we were in the jungle, not to be left alone with wild animals. We would take every possible physical means to secure ourselves. But what is much more important is the individual securing his own inner life, bringing it into a pattern which will not turn and bite him. And the world is full of individuals who have been bitten by their own mistakes. So the good book tells us, and experience tells us, that there is only one essential bond of human relationship. One of the classic statements of Mahatma Gandhi was that there will never be peace in this world until all human beings are bound together with nothing stronger than the silken thread of love. Love is the only answer. We've been working with hate for centuries, and therefore hate has grown and become a very luxurious type of plant, but it will never bring peace. You can never fight your way to peace in yourself or in the world. Many changes may have to take place in society before the human being is capable of realizing this. But do not forget that in a certain number of years, you are going to depart from this society. You're going to leave a world that is run by selfishness and aggression for the most part. And you are going into a world where these values no longer exist. Your only passport to the larger world is the degree of unselfish love that has been allowed to develop within your own nature. You're going to a place where all of your ambitions as you know them today on this material plane are worthless. In that other way of life, aspiration takes precedence over ambition. The individual is rewarded according to the development of his own internal values. And his treasures, which are stored up in heaven, are peace of heart, peace of mind, generosity of spirit, and simple, natural love of God and all that lives. These are the only attitudes you can take with you. Now, it is a mistake to assume that when you slip off this mortal coil, you will automatically have all these virtues. There are several old stories. There's one story about a banker, and this, by the way, goes back to Egypt, about a banker who lived his entire life banking. So when the time came for him to pass into the next life, the judges of these matters looked him over carefully, and they found out that he didn't know much about anything except banking. So they did the only thing they could. He'd been an honest banker. He hadn't cheated people, but he just had no other interest. So they said, the only way we can make a heaven for this man is to set him up in a banking house. So they got a table, money-changing table. They gave him scales and coins and a comfortable chair and a pad of paper, the papyrus in those days, and they told him to go into business. So for centuries after centuries, he loaned money, got it back, and paid the sureties in a world of dreams of his own. He never actually knew what had happened to him, really. He just thought he had left one banking house and gone into another. And finally, when the time came for him to be reborn again, he just closed that banking house and came back. There was no understanding, no contact with the life of the spirit beyond, because he didn't have it. Now, the only way we can transform the empty-death state from a rather monotonous continuation of our present attitudes is to get rid of the attitudes while we're here. We want to get more natural inquiry. We want to have a more sincere interest in learning and understanding and expanding consciousness and unfolding the spiritual aspects of our lives, so that when we do come into a larger world, we come as adventurers looking for new things, looking for something better. And our future will be fortunate if in this process we have not become self-centered, but have desired most of all to understand and share in the divine love. Under those conditions, we won't be stuck behind the banking table in the next life. We will go on and grow. But if we have nothing to take with us but our mistakes, this probably inspired the Egyptians to their idea of purgatory. Purgatory was nothing but a place of purifying, and it might take a long time to purify the individual from his materialistic inclinations even after he has left this world. So the time to start universal citizenship is now, fully realizing that if you have to sacrifice a little of the physical satisfaction, that we are only here for a limited period of time, but we are citizens of eternity forever. And it is our citizenship there that is important. But because this veil of matter conceals us from that larger life, we are unaware of the reality of these things. The simplest devotions that we have, which inspire perhaps an understanding, is the maternal instinct, one of the most important. The love of mother for child. That very close communion of a parent with a little life coming into manifestation. This can be probably one of the purest forms of love known in the world. It is a form of love in which there is really no thought of self, perhaps no thought of separateness. But there is the wonder of beholding this little one coming into life gradually, unfolding its potentials, and very dependent upon human assistance for the fulfillment of its activities. Now there is a certain peculiar dependency in which deity is dependent upon humanity. Humanity is the only power, the only form, the only way in which deity can perfect its own humanity. Deity moving into manifestation, bringing with it its natural and beautiful rules and laws, has probably its highest expression in our physical life, in human beings. Here we have the direct instrument, the realization that the divine power is coming gradually to birth in us. We see it perhaps almost as we would see a newborn babe. But what we may not realize is that within this newborn babe, as within the physical one in our own family, the most important factor is deity itself. In each of us is a spark of the divine. In each new child, that spark is again brought into manifestation. God moving into matter, finally rises through the lower forms of matter to achieve its first self-expression in humanity. We are therefore burdened with a very deep and beautiful responsibility. It is our privilege to make obvious, to release, to bring into manifestation every beautiful thing that is in the heart of God. It is our privilege to become servants in this house of eternity and to become more and more aware of our partnership with deity in the perfection of the divine plan. But we have gradually lost sight of these things. And as intimate personal problems become more burdensome, we lose faith, we lose hope. And gradually, the problem of survival in a very complex society takes over and controls us. We are warned, however, that those who would save their lives shall lose them. But those who lose their lives in the service of truth shall have life everlasting. And it is gradually a matter of whether or not we want to save that which is the good in ourselves, whether we want to truly release out of our own nature the potential of beauty that is there. Now, there are certain other simple little things that we can bear in mind that always help. One is that the individual cannot live entirely on a one-pointed mental attitude. There is too much pressure. Therefore, every individual who has an economic or physical problem should also have some kind of an aesthetic avocational interest. He should have some way to compensate for the intensity of the problems of physical survival by something that brings with it a release toward truth, something that gives him a new and fuller reason for life, that he escapes from the pressure of one purpose, even though that purpose may be very noble. He must have variety. He must have always a door leading out of the material world into something better. If he is posited here in this world, there must be a window through which he can look out into that larger world. This window is creative imagination. This window is the power of the individual to see something beyond matter. He must have some vision of a larger world and a larger purpose and a greater destiny. Therefore, through whatever creative self-expression he may have, he may gain gradually the realization of the importance of having not only a well-ordered material life, but a material life that is rich in constructive overtones. If he is serving himself with part of his life, he must serve others with another part of his life. If he is thinking of his own advancement, he must never forget the common good. If he wants to be a better person, he must make some contribution to the betterness of those around him. He must have dedication. He must have charity, which is one of the associate terms. Love being termed charity. Charity is not only giving to the poor. Charity is the forgiving of the mistakes of others. It is the individual freeing his mind from various antagonisms and chronic memories by simply forgiving those that have in any way injured him. Perhaps he only thinks they did, but he can at least forgive his own thought on the subject. Whatever he does, there must be, with love, a certain forgiveness, a certain realization that the individual can be bigger than the things that happen to him, can have greater insight than is shown by a person who is ultimately and utterly bound up with his own projects, his own attitudes. So charity begins in the forgiveness of others, a broadness toward life, an overcoming of prejudices, an overcoming of intolerances, a recognition of value wherever it is and whoever has it, and most of all, a continually seeking after greater value, To understand better is to love better. And that which may begin with indifference can be developed and perfected into affection through understanding. Everywhere we are looking for friendship, for kindliness, for the relation of things that is not brittle, not forced, not destructive. And as a person who work with this problem, we can do a great deal with it. Now, one thing that many people have discovered over the period of time is that it's very, very important to vocalize a conviction. When we keep it locked within ourselves, very often we can't even state it correctly. But if we can take a beautiful thought and express it, if we can say to ourselves that we do have love of our fellow men, and that we do love deity, and that we are dedicated to the services of value, if we think this, it's very good. But sometimes it is better to come right out and have a verbal statement of it. Strangely enough, something mysterious happens when we put thoughts into words. The thoughts that come out of our mouths go around the sides and go back to our ears. And we believe them better when they come that way. There's a great authority in what we hear, or what we see. But there is not as much authority in merely what we think. The thoughts are too diffuse to begin with. And wherever we have some type of religious devotion, it is very good for us to restate, audibly, or in writing, or both, that which we hold to be most important. If we really wish to convert ourselves, we must use every possible instrument of conversion, because against it is a static pressure from ages of environmental circumstances. We are trying to overcome a world around us, and the only way we can do it is to establish firmly the world within us. So it is very useful sometimes to actually verbalize a conviction. If we really believe that love is a divine power, we should state it to ourselves. And in stating it to ourselves, we should try to image it in ourselves. We should not leave it as a strange word that has 100 meanings. We should leave it only as a term to represent the inevitable relationships of living things. It is the ultimate relationship. It is next to identity. And the more affection we have, the closer we come to identification with those who are the objects of our affection. And the more completely our affection is spiritualized, the closer we come to identity with the one eternal love that governs everything. We gradually can create an auto-suggestive remedy for a number of our defects. We can very definitely and intentionally reverbalize. We can also think. And I think the average person would do better that whenever there are a few quiet moments, when he's waiting in the doctor's office or when he's sitting around or trying to keep his mind on television, that if in those moments he would choose silence. And wherever there is quietude and aloneness, where the pressures on the outside can be controlled or reduced, to restate every day a number of times the real meaning of love. The idea of bestowing self upon those that need, giving without hope of return, doing what would be, as far as we can do it, the work that God would have us do. And in this type of thing, gradually to create an image of our relationship with life, an image based upon an enduring and eternal friendship, a relationship which also gradually unfolds to us more and more of the mysteries of the universal plan. When we love the universal plan, it will open up. It will reveal more and more of its mysteries. It responds to this far more than it responds to intellectual investigation. The scientist can keep on exploring space, but he will never find the answer until he learns to love space and recognize in it the source of all things for all creatures. It is this bridging of intellectual concept with a simple, gentle, warm emotion of regard, respect, adoration that opens most of the doors that stand closed to us at the present time. For there is nothing in the world that brings greater internal peace than to look around and find nothing to hate. Now we may have to, for a moment, imagine that there are things to hate. It may sound much too platitudinous to say there is nothing to hate. Why shouldn't we hate despotism? Why shouldn't we hate cruelty? We can regret them. We can, in our own minds and hearts, realize how much better things would be if these things faded away. But when we energize our sadness by a tremendous viciousness of reaction, we have missed the point entirely. Corruption is not something to be hated. It is something to be gradually brought back into line with truth. It is something that must, in course of time, change its ways. And if man is unable to change these ways, the divine plan will change them. Because in the nature of things, the entire universal existence is essentially an expression of love. It is an expression of love made possible through law. And the way of training little living things from the smallest to the greatest is through discipline. And we discipline the emotions by keeping them beautiful. We discipline the mind by keeping it reasonable. And we discipline, in a certain sense, our own inner character by bringing it under the rule of moderation in all things. I think it's important that every person should set aside a certain amount of time, it's only a minute or two, to quiet contemplation of the purposes of the divine will, to reaffirm that it is more important and most important that we are all on God's side. It is up to us to try in every way that we can to expand our own integrities, because integrity is not to be gained from the mind alone, nor are we going to be saved by wisdom alone. But all these other things, knowledge, skills, all this, these are only instruments for the expression of something else. And the final summary of all knowledge is this simple recognition of the identity of life, that everything is one, and all things in varying degrees are trying to outgrow isolation and restore the realization of their common unity. We are not separate creatures. We are aspects of one life. We do not have separate lives or separate minds, finally. We are all having only relative relationships with the divine faculties and powers which flow into manifestation through us. We are one being. We are one life, indivisible. We are one purpose that can never be completely destroyed by selfishness or by antagonism. But because we are indivisible, actually love is only a recognition of this. Love is a sudden realization of our inevitable relationship with every other living thing. Love is that which impels us sometimes to overlook the faults in others, because, as they say, love is blind. But even if love be blind, it has within it a tremendous healing power. And when love is there, and is really working, and is really functioning, it can open its eyes, and it can see that its dreams of beauty were not exaggerated. And love makes everything more beautiful. Love wrinkles out the tired patterns of years. Love makes all things new. And in this newness, we begin to see not the outside natures of things, but the inside nature shining through. And when we are able to see the internal light of those we care for shining through, it would be almost impossible for us to resist the impulse to bring admiration, adoration to these persons who are around us, but who are actually only ourselves. We are all one life. To realize that is to finally find our destiny. And the most important factor is bringing things together to overcome differences, to overcome separateness, to rise for at least a moment above the material pressures of living. The emotion of affection is the greatest therapy, the greatest mystery that we have. It is a very mysterious emotion, probably the most mysterious. The reason it is mysterious is because it arises in the mystery of the divine nature itself. We cannot actually fathom that divine nature to its core. We can, however, trace it back from the commonplace to many very noble and beautiful things. But we cannot find the exact definition of that which exists only in the divine being. But we can see it flowing out of that divine being. And it is like a living water, for love nourishes everything and hate destroys. Love gradually flowing makes the whole world fertile. It brings all things to the fullness of themselves. It helps us to lead children to the fullness of their lives. It helps us to assist those in trouble to such relief as we can bestow upon them. Our faith has the sacraments of marriage, of baptism. It has the sacraments of unction. All these things were fashioned to reveal the love of God and to bind man to that love by disciplines. Disciplines not intended to frustrate the individual, but disciplines suitable to bring his life into harmony with the divine plan, which is the fullness of all life. We are not supposed to be frustrated creatures in a world of infinite opportunity. We are rather intended to be magnificent creatures of opportunity in a world which at the present moment is mostly frustration. The frustration is on circumstances, not on ourselves. If we can unfold and develop and perfect our own natures, we can then gradually reach out, and we'll find that love is not ultimately personal at all, any more than life is. All things share in life. All things share in the potential of love. And as we learn to share in it and share with it, many of the problems which we now try to intellectualize do not need to be intellectualized. For just a kind thought and a kind word can overcome hours of mental struggle and conflict. There is nothing to love more rapid and more important than the forgiveness of the mistakes of others and the disciplining of our own lives. The doctrine of redemption by grace means that the grace in us redeems us, and the grace we show to others helps to build the better world we all wish to live in. It is something to start in with and work with to the best of our abilities every day. And whenever we see strife or conflict arising, quieten down and try to see how you can help truth to manifest to a difficult situation. If you can do this and do it consistently, you'll have a much happier and more useful life. And we need this type of thinking at the moment where practically the whole world is involved in discords which are not necessary, but which are the inevitable result of the individual placing physical values first and not guarding and guiding physical values by the proper use of metaphysical principles. It is only when the divine comes down here through us that the mistakes that are common to humanity can be completely rectified and solved. So it's a great challenge, it's a great mystery, but it's very beautiful. Thank you very much.